have no theme song because I'm so amateur style. Boop, boop. Hi, YouTube. It's me again, So Amateur Style with April. And we are going to complete our Quilt-as-you-go squares into a quilt top today. One of the things I wanted to show you really quick before we actually quilt our squares together is how to make a border if you choose to do so for your quilt squares. So here is my completed idea for my quilt top. As you can see, I have just arranged them. I tried to keep like colors not touching each other, and then with the keeping the middle the same with the same color, it kind of created this really nifty pattern. And the pattern isn't perfect. Like here, you can see where they're not touching, so maybe I'd want to flip it around this way. Maybe that makes it a little more consistent. But then I have these two touching, so that bugs me. So let's move this here. Okay, one moment, honey. Sorry. Lazy Saturday afternoon. Kids are watching cartoons. Okay, so that looks a little better to me. So you can see this kind of like approximate design that I have out here. It makes these really cool diamond shapes when I've arranged the squares like so. There are several different ways you can arrange these, and whatever makes you happy, do it. Because you really can't go wrong with strip quilts. They're just so much fun, and everyone comes out looking unique and different. So what you're going to do is, as you can see, I've actually trimmed these down to squares. Originally I had 9 by 8 inch rectangles, but I have trimmed these down. Let's go to work. I'm squishing the square. I'm squishing the square. Okay, sorry. Unless you've seen Kids in the Hall, you have no clue what I'm talking about. Okay, so what I did is I trimmed these down into 8 by 8. 8 by 8, because I like the way the square shape kind of matched up. Now there is going to be a little bit in between each row here, so they won't match up right next to each other, but I still think it's going to look pretty nifty when it's done. So for our border, which is going to go around the outside of our quilt, if you choose to do this, some people will just take this and bind it and call it a day, which is fine after they've sewn their squares together. What I'm going to do is I've gone 1, 2, 3, 4 by 5. So we're going to do 4 times 8 on this side and 5 times 8 on this side. So 5 times 8 is 40. 4 times 8 is 32, I think. I'm going to do the math later on a calculator. I think that's 32, just thinking off the top of my head. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut a strip that actually goes along the edge. I'm going to choose to make my strip 3 inches wide, just because you make it however wide or narrow you want. 3 inches wide by the length of my sides. So my sides are 32 inches. Now once I put that on, we are actually going to extend our top border out. We're going to add all of this together, and then we're going to extend it out on each side 3 more inches. So it will actually end up being 46 inches when you're done with your measuring the back and batting, if you choose to use batting for your border. And then I'm going to show you a really neat way to finish off the border for this quilt so that it kind of matches the theme that we're using here with the strips. So I'm going to pause this. I'm going to go help my kids with their cartoons, and I will be right back. Okay, and we're back. Try to talk quietly because baby girl is in her crib, and I think she has just fallen asleep. Oh, not quite. Here, sweetie. Hold your bottle. Hold your bottle. Hold it. There you go. Don't fall asleep with that in your mouth, silly girl. Okay, so here is our border measured out. I measured out the sides 4 by 8, which is 32, and then this long side is 5 by 8, which is 40, plus the extra 3 inches on each side for the width of my strip, which made it 46 inches. And it worked out pretty darn well. I did have to, you probably can't see this very well on camera, but I did have to join up some of my fleece scraps together at a 45-degree angle in order to attach them. You can do a 45-degree angle or just a straight edge, because I needed to have a little bit more length than I had on just my solid piece. So I did have to extend that a little bit, but that's okay because when we sew our strips on to our border, to make our border that we're making for this particular quilt, it will cover all that up and you won't even barely notice. So maybe a straight seam would have been better because we're going to be sewing straight seams, or maybe I'll sew 45-degree angle seams. I don't know. We'll see how I feel when I get to the sewing machine. So now we're going to take one of these strips, so I can show you guys how to do this, and we are going to make our border, and we're off. Okay, welcome to part 2 of my video on how to sew together your Quilt-as-you-go squares. We are now sewing our border. You could choose just to have 2 same size strips, 3 inches wide, same length for your top and your bottom, and then just sew those together and quilt those together. Or in this case, I'm going to make a matching border with the strips that I used in my squares and sew those on as strips. So I thought that was a really cool idea. I really don't know what it's going to turn out looking like because I haven't done this before, but you know, experimentation, that's what's fun about this. So what I did is I laid one strip right side down onto my 3-inch border, and I went ahead and pinned my next strip that I'm going to be sewing right side. This is right side up, sorry, this one's right side up. This one is right side down. The border is right side down because the border, the part of the border we want showing is this right side up side. Since this is fleece, there really isn't a right or wrong side on this particular type, but if there is on your fabric that you're using, you want to make sure your right side is always going to be the side that you want showing is going to be down on this border. So now we have this right side up, this right side down, 2 right sides touching, and this one right side down with the wrong sides touching. Hope that was as clear as mud. Okay, so then we're going to go to our sewing machine, and let me hold this. I've pinned these together. When you use pins, please, please, please make sure to pull them out before you've sewn over them. So it's just eyeballing a 1/4-inch seam. I'm not doing this perfectly because it's a scrap quilt, and I think the less perfect it is, the more interesting it is. Oops. Uh-oh, machine error. Okay, so what I have to do here is I'm going to pause the video. And don't let stuff like this frustrate you. I'm glad this happened. Don't let stuff like this frustrate you because it's always fixable. So I'm going to pause the video. I'm going to see what's going on with my bobbin. I think maybe it came loose. And then I will be right back. Okay, everything's fixed. I finished sewing my first strip on, and then I folded it back and just simply finger pressed it for sake of time. If you choose to, you can steam press it between each strip. Right now, not so concerned about that. I think it's going to turn out just fine anyway. Let's put on our next strip. I'm going to do a couple more of these so you guys get the idea, and then I'm going to complete my border. When we come back, I will start showing you the process of actually sewing your pre-quilted border and squares together. Alright, so one more. Bring this to the machine. Right sides together, again, right sides together. Alright, we got that. Snip. And then let's fold that back. One of these days I'll enlist a cameraman. Maybe I can get my husband to do it. Alright, when I become rich and famous, I'll hire somebody to do my camera work for me. LOL. Okay, so we've got these folded back, and then let's pick another pretty, I really like this color. Another pretty strip, right sides together. This one I'm actually going to trim up to be a little straighter. So let's do that. It's a little easier to work with when your edges are a little straighter. When you're sewing in straight lines like this. Okay, so right sides together. sewing machine. As you can tell, I'm not a big fan of pins, so I don't use a lot of them if I can avoid it. Alright, let's rethread this needle. It's so much fun when stuff like this happens. Yeah, I'm going to get you all right up in there so you can see what I'm doing. It's kind of blurry, but you'll get the idea. Alrighty. Extreme close-up, super blurry. Rethread. Okay. And we're back. Okay. And so. Alright. That's another strip. And we'll pull that out. We will snip snip. And we will hold this down and fold it back. There we go. That's another one. So what we're going to do is after we finished sewing all of this on, we will remeasure it to the right length and width, and then we'll trim it up, and I will show you guys what all 4 borders look like when it's completed. So another pause, and I'll be back. Bye-bye. Okay, so here is my border after the strips have been sewn on. Looks like a mess right now. It's a cool looking mess, but it still looks like a mess. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring it over to my ironing board. And I'm going to turn my iron on. Okay, and then once I've turned my iron on and let that heat up, then I'm going to take my border. I'm going to put it with my strip side up, and I'm just going to press these seams down. This will just make it easier when I cut it for my cuts to be as precise and straight as possible. Let's get all this ironed down. Ooh, I just fogged up my camera lens. Again, this doesn't have to be perfect or precise. I'm just flattening it out so that when I cut it, it doesn't bulk up as much. Alright, so I got that. This little seam here is acting a little goofy. That's one that's right over my, where I sewed the 2 ends together. Manipulate that a little bit. Okay. Spritz, 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 spritz. Extra seam. Iron that down a little flatter. Alright, good enough. Alright, so now we have all that ironed. And we're going to trim it. Let's turn our iron off for safety. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to match up my 2 ends here, like so. So then I have this in half. Push that down. So that's folded in half. And I am going to do it this way. Let's get out my mat. Now, if you have the luxury of having enough space for a large table to use, then that's awesome, but I unfortunately do not. Okay, I think the first thing I'm going to do is trim off these ends so I can actually see where my ends are. So let's get this over here. Put our straight edge on, like so. And then take our straight edge. So I'm going to have to set you all down for a minute again because I do not want to use my straight edge with one hand. Alright, so I'm going to use my straight edge. I'm going to trim this off straight so I can see where that end is. And I'm going to flip it over onto the other end of my strip border, and I'm going to trim this end straight. now I can see where my ends are. Alright, now I have my ends matched up like so. Because of the sewing of my strip length, the length of my strip, it did get a little distorted, so I'm going to, as I'm trimming off these ends, trim just a tiny little bit on each edge to make it straighter. So my final width of this may not be exactly 3 inches, but it will work out because we will do the same thing with our other strip, and it should all kind of match up eventually. Alright, so make sure straight here, and then we're just going to trim off that one side. Here, let me do it like this. You guys can try to see what I'm doing. That is a little better, I think. Sorry. Like I said, cameraman one of these days. Over it one more time just to make sure I caught every little piece. Alright, and then that goes. And then same thing on the other side. Keep it straight as possible. With the edge. I hate cutting. I'm always scared I'm going to screw something up majorly. Okay, throw it down my 10-inch mark. Just going to use that line for a guide. Alright. And then take my straight edge. Be very, very careful with these straight edges. Straight edge cutters. Rotary cutters can get... Some people use something called an oops glove or a safety glove, quilter's glove, just to protect their hands a little bit. I find it's hard for me to hold things when I have that on, so I try not to use one. Okay, now for the reveal. This is my favorite part. You can see we have a little bit here. I may want to trim that off. You know what, I think I'm going to trim that off a little bit more on that side just because I have some fabric showing I don't want showing. And it sounds like baby girl's getting up from her nap, so let me get this done quickly so I can go pay attention to her for a minute. Okay, I'm just going to come in like about 1/8 of an inch over just to trim that up a little bit so we can get all of our fabric as straight as possible. Oops, sorry, I knocked y'all over. I apologize. Trim this up so my edge is straight. This is why I like using the rotary cutter as opposed to scissors, because scissors tend to not give you as straight of a line unless you're like super scissor cutter person, which I am not. Okay, that's better. Alright, so there is our back, and as you can see, we have these, let's see if you can see, get some more light, we have these pre-quilted lines in it, which is really cool. So we have our pre-quilted lines, so our edge is quilted, and then we flip it over, and you will see, we will see, because I don't even know yet what this is going to look like, what our border looks like. How cool is that? Oh my gosh, I am so happy with how that turned out. That is so pretty. Jeez, y'all, I may not want to give this blanket up after I'm done. LOL. I may want to keep this blanket, but we'll see. If I do, I have another blanket that I made that I may give to the person. Yeah, don't tell anybody. Okay, so there is my completed border. And then of course I'm going to go back and finish all my borders. So let's put this on our quilt to see what it's going to look like approximately. Hi, sweet girl. Do you wake up? You wake up from your nap? She's such a good baby. Okay. So this is just approximate, of course, because we haven't actually put it on our quilt yet. But there you go. That's what our border is going to look like when it's on there. Eee! So cool. I'm absolutely in love with this quilt so far. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to finish all of these borders, and I'm going to come back to you guys in a part 3 so that you guys can just watch this simple part, the first part, and not have to watch a 3-hour video. That would be awful. Alright, so this is part 2 of our Quilt-as-you-go strip quilt, and I will see you guys in part 3, which I will attempt to show you how to attach your squares together. Thank you so much. See you in part 3.